Ich möchte Sie zu unserem letzten inhaltlichen Panel heute Abend begrüßen, und zwar, was heißt in Zukunft Subjekt? Und wie Sie vielleicht schon sehen, es ist nur ein Subjekt in Persona auf der Bühne. Das hat damit zu tun, dass Eva Ilios aus Krankheitsgründen nicht hier bei uns in Bonn sein kann, aber zugeschaltet wird. Ebenso wie Xiang Serong, der aus Visagründen nicht nach Bonn kommen konnte. Die Figur der Kritik ist untrennbar verbunden mit dem Descartes'schen Subjektmodell. Welche fluiden, kollektiven Subjektformen zeigen sich in den gegenwärtigen Transformationen der Kritik? Ann Cotton ist Schriftstellerin und Übersetzerin, hat aber auch Rezensionen für die Popzeitschrift The Gap geschrieben, Poetry Slam durchgeführt. Sie bewegt sich, um eine Rezension über sie aufzunehmen, mit jedem Satz, ja fast schon mit jedem Wort, auf mindestens 3 bis 4 Deutungsebenen. Gerade deswegen zielt sie auf die Kunst des Einfachen. Sie fasst Sprache als System, Philosophie und künstliche Intelligenz aus, interessiert sich dafür und ist seit 2017 Mitglied der Akademie der Künste. Ich kann es mir nicht verkneifen, einen wunderbaren Splitter von Ökoschotter, einem Gedichtzyklus in diesem Zusammenhang kurz zu Gehör zu bringen. Über diese Trümmer zu gehen macht Mühe, werfen Sie doch die Beine dahin, dorthin, somit den Körper, der die Beine zusammenhalten muss. Doch ist das immer noch leichtere Arbeit für Individualität. Für sie ist eigentlich jede Arbeit absurd, als die Steine umzudrehen, zu sortieren, sie anzuerkennen und in Ruhe gangbare Wege zu bauen. Es wird vielleicht um Fragen gehen, wie funktioniert ein queeres Subjekt im Lichte des Transdualismus und wie kann eine Kritik des Affekts stattfinden. Wir sind gespannt auf das Gespräch.
Danke, thank you. I'm very lonely here, but I'm very glad to see Zairong Xiang. How are you going? How's it going? What time is it in China?
I'm in the future. it's already the 20th of November, so like midnight 35.
Great, so we actually can talk to the subject of the future this evening.
Exactly.
Zhang Zairong, Dr. Zhang, has written a very interesting book. For me, it's very interesting, called Queer Ancient Ways, a Decolonial Exploration, Punctum Books 2018. After studying, doing his PhD in comparative literature in Tübingen and Perpignan, he was in various projects at the Potsdam University and at ICI Berlin, and is now assistant professor of comparative literature at Duke Kunshan University, as well as associate director of arts at the same place. So we are honored to have you here. And I think Eva Illouz, she's here. Welcome, Eva Illouz. What time is it in Berlin? In Paris? It's the same time as here, right?
5:30.
Okay, maybe some minor adjustments, but good to see you. Eva Illouz is professor of sociology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and director of studies at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris. She's written many books about various different aspects about the economization of affect, of love, of relationships, and there have been cooperations and various books that are anthologies of other authors. I was very impressed with these observations because she has a hand for analyzing the structural side and the problems of economization, but also she's just a neutral observer of things that are going on, that are affecting us, that are manipulating us, and at the same time it doesn't fall quickly into the trap of paranoia or Verschwörungstheorie. So I can only recommend reading some of these books. One of the most recent ones was Was ist sexuelles Kapital, together with Dana Kaplan, 2021. Or a book that appeared in the same year, 2018. In French, it was Happycratie, Comment l'industrie de bonheur contrôle notre vie. And a different book, but with some similarities. She was a co-editor with Axel Honneth, Wahre Gefühle, Authentizität im Konsumkapitalismus. And I think this is something that is intersectional with our topic of criticism, the question of authenticity, a thing that would come to the subject. But I actually would like to start with the question of what is a subject, actually. It's a quite difficult term, the more you think about it. As far as I understand, in French, in German, in English, we have le sujet, das Subjekt, the subject, and there's a certain ambiguity, because subject, on the one hand, means originally the Untertan, the subject of a sovereign monarch. At the same time, it has become the subject of a sentence in a grammatical sense, and it also has the sense of a topic, or that it becomes almost like an object, but a topic is not an object. There's a certain shift here. And this shiftiness has been quite important in post-structuralist thought, but it's difficult to translate and it's difficult to conserve because it becomes quite uncertain which aspect an author is referring to. So the first question that interests me, and I'm sorry, this is really banal, but I think we need to clear up the term subject before we go on. Could you gift us with a perspective on the difficulties of translating subject into Chinese, and there's some points just to widen our view of the history of translation?
Sure. Thank you for the question and the introduction, and I'm very honored to be here. I will share the reason later why I'm not actually there physically, so back to the question of subject or subjectivity. This is really you ask anyone in any Chinese speaker, they would tell you that it is 主体 or 主体性, right? But these words are modern invention. Let's say it's a translated subject. Well, translated subject. Let's say in classical Chinese, this is not a issue, right? The idea of subject, as you described, as embodying all these different aspects, especially as it is attached to grammatical usage, the one that is responsible for the action and the predicate, right? This is not something that classical philosophy is concerned with. When we say classical philosophy, I'm mainly referring to Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. They all have different idea that that can be said to be in one way or the other related to subject. But I think a subject there is not really a useful equivalent. The useful equivalent is actually the idea of the self, right? Self or selfhood, and we can talk about that later. But just to say, you posed a very interesting and important question, as also an awareness that this very important philosophical concept might not exist in its entirety or direct equivalence in the classical tradition. But owning I just want to add a disclaimer that owning in terms of in temporal terms, right? Of course, we use the idea of subject and subjectivity very much in modern philosophy, which is already a mix of everything.
Thank you very much for that opening. I think it could be seen maybe as a prism also, this question of translation, because it's not there's a lack of this concept, it's just divided into different, an array of concepts, perhaps. Eva Illouz, toward a post-normative critique of emotional authenticity, the conclusion to the collection Emotions as Commodities, 2018, you connect the production of authenticity with the notion of self and remark upon the historical youth of the latter. Until the 18th century, you write, there was no concept of authenticity because there was no ontology of the self, no view of the self as having deep, innate, asocial, and individual properties, which demanded techniques of authentication, techniques to discover and display that buried inner truth. And you go on to various other things, but I really was interested in the question, do we need a self? And also, how does this production actually work? We are doing this work of producing a self all the time. What kind of work is it, and how much are we ourselves responsible for creating authenticity? How much is the media taking over some of this work to produce authenticity and produce a concept of self?
Thank you. There are many questions. I'm not sure exactly which one I should respond to. Let me try and say 2 words about the thesis. The book that you quoted from tries to analyze the emergence of a new category of commodity, which is the emotional commodity, whereby some emotions are produced from the outset as commodities to be consumed. And my claim is that this is one of the major ways in which capitalism has evolved. That is, by producing increasingly commodities. Now, commodities, these kind of commodities, are characterized by the fact that they connect very tightly subjectivity and the market. In other words, imagine you are going to a psychologist to find out who you are or how to control your anger. What you're doing is that you're producing an emotional commodity, which is less anger, or say being able to be sexually more free. You're doing this at the same time that you're producing yourself. So you're situated in a market in which you're purchasing a service in order to construct a self. That's the main idea. I mean, the main idea behind the book is that we cannot, in these commodities, we cannot separate really the self, the inner self even, and the market. And these categories, of course, have been usually very much separated, at least in the sociological canon. So to go back to your question, I think you asked me if we need a self. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not exactly sure how to answer this, because in a way, and if I go back to your very first question of the subject, in philosophy and sociology, we have very much come to suspect, to put into question and into doubt the very notion of a subject. And I think, Michel Foucault, let's say, if I have to put a name on this philosophical gesture, I would say Michel Foucault has been mostly responsible about putting into question this notion which was central to humanism. So let me, and I think this is a distinction that my colleague before just made, let me make a distinction between a self and a subject. I think we always have a self. A self is, if you want, the instance that coordinates action. It's the very capacity to say I, and to say that this happened to me. To have a self is really to to simply be a human being. I don't think you can think of agency or humanness without a self. It doesn't mean, at least in philosophy and anthropology, that to have a self, you need to be an I, to have the subjectivity, to be the subject, for example, of humanism. And this is what Foucault was mostly after. And especially in his claim that the subject was in fact crisscrossed by all kinds of discourses, medicine and science of sexuality and psychiatry and disciplinary techniques that assisted in governmentality. And so in that sense, the subject of Foucault gets completely, under Foucault, gets completely exploded. And you can no longer really say with great certainty, this I turns out to be many anonymous, in fact, discourses. So one of the questions I remember that you asked me was, we always need a self. However, this self does not need to have the form of the humanist subject in the way that Foucault described. Whether that is desirable is another issue. It's a political issue that we can discuss. Tell me, please, if I have answered your question, and I probably forgot some aspects of your question. I'd be happy to hear more.
No, thank you. That was my question, and I think there are many answers to it. And sometimes the answer is also space and time, because just the way a person in their life takes up space and time, and that's our way of being. And so, in listening to your answer, it occurred to me that perhaps the difference between an answer that I might give, I don't need a self, I only put it on when I meet other people, and another answer one might give, that one is a multiplicity of selves, and another answer that one give, that all that is the self, they converge, or they're different ways of perhaps feeling the difference that we all inhabit while being a kind of avatar with which we make ourselves usable, but for other people. I also had to think of the term fungibility that's become important as one framing that has helped distinguish or help clarify for people who don't understand it the concept of appropriation, and that this concept of fungibility is to make oneself useful for other people. But this is often a thing that is done to one, and that one just learns to conform to, and may have to unlearn these skills that keep fitting one all too well in a hegemonial society and a brutal society. So
can I just say something here?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much about your remark on selves, on multiple selves. You're absolutely right. I think we feel that the self is a very elusive category, especially one that can be very much played with. But I think I think concepts can be checked at their limits in a way. So if you ask people, women who have been raped, they would have a sense that their self, that their body, that they have been violated. And there is something that you cannot really account for. What is this self? The sense that something that really belongs only to us, that is only ours, that has been violated. So I guess that is one of the senses in which I talked about the self, that sense of inviolability of the person that can be accounted for only in a way when it has been violated. That's all. I just wanted to add this to your very interesting remark.
Thank you. That's a hugely delicate point. I'm not quite sure if I understand. If I get you right, then there is a kind of paradox at the heart of the thing that could also be reformulated as self being active and passive at the same time, or at the same time one is in control in a certain way and is not in control in a certain way, meaning one could never say that a person who has been raped has no self, or has lost their self, or has broken their self. At the same time, there is something that has been violated that shouldn't be violated. So somehow, that's the border that you're talking about.
Thank you. You're putting it extremely well. Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you. I would never dare to touch such a difficult subject, actually. Dr. Xiang, your term transdualism brings a subtle and complex criticisms of dualisms in the West that somehow keep falling back into dualisms. Transdualism reminds us of the non-reducibly dialectic underground that we live in, and that trite dualisms cannot but scratch the surface of, but they itch, and they hurt, actually, and their amplified presence and the way they keep coming back, not only in the German feuilleton, but often in the German feuilleton, as this either-or discourse, or they demotivate many of us in our interactions with society to the point that we may sit and not even feel like saying anything. And so I wanted to ask you to speak a little bit about transdualism and a queer subjectivity. How does a transdualist subjectivity work or be effective and be affected at the same time? Just maybe a presentation also of the basic idea so that everybody can know what we're talking about.
Thank you. I'm still ruminating about what Professor Ilus just said. I will try to see if I can connect some dots here. I have a problem with the formulation queer subjectivity, or queer subject for that matter. And of course, this is not your fault. This is the condition through which language, or in this case, English, makes sense, right? 2 points. Queer subject, and also, as we say, in the light of, right? In my thinking, and this is not too crazy, let's say, queer is somehow like Tao in Taoism, that is the unspeakable speakable, right? It's the non-identitarian identificator. I wouldn't say identity. So queer subject is an impossibility on itself. Let me rewind back to the first question. I'm really happy you quoted Professor Ilus's remark that before the 18th century, I guess this is in the West, that this self as a deep, innate, asocial and individual property didn't exist, right? Or it didn't exist to the extent that it demands the technique of authentication. Why this is relevant here is because if we look at these 3 major philosophical traditions in classical Chinese, these none of them presupposes a innate, asocial, ahistorical self, right? If we start with Confucianism, this one that well, let's see how it works. The self needs continuous cultivation, right? Not something to be reviewed. So not like innate, authentic something, right? That needs to be reviewed in a, I don't know, in a clinical situation, or in a through some kind of discovery, but something to be arrived at, right, through this continuous cultivation. The autonomous individual in this case doesn't have much meaning, because it has to exist through relationships. And there are some kind of typical relations that in the Confucian tradition is where the self is cultivated, or should be cultivated, right? The father, son, ruler, minister, elder brother, younger brother, husband, wife, so on and so forth, right? The Taoist self, and I will actually stay with that. It's the one that I find most interesting and very much related to queer to queerness. The Taoist self is only attainable through negation. Interestingly, in Zhuangzi, there's a story in which, which gave this famous sentence, "Wu sang wo," right? If you know a bit of Chinese, the word "I" in modern Chinese is actually the one that is negated in the sentence. So I lost myself there in a Zhuangzi text. The negation is not really the I, but I don't know. Let's say it's the me, right? The moi, the mich, which according to the Taoist is the phenomenological self. So it's the self that manifests itself in the other's I. Yeah? This is the one that needs to be negated in order for the I to be truly oneself. And now the negation is also the negation of alienation of the I, right? The becoming other of the me. So well, the Taoists will say like non-action is the way the self could become the self by not becoming one, right? So the negation here is not stripes the self of external influences, and that's not at all what it tends to mean, right? So it doesn't. So it's not a process of authentication precisely, but a process in which the self could become part of the mirrored things again. Right? The Taoist is very much concerned with the mirrored things, and this I lost myself, or I negate myself, Wu sang wo, is actually from a chapter called precisely the equality of all things, Qi Wu Lun, right? So in this, in kind of in view of these three traditions, well, the Buddhist one is also very complex, but just to say that the Buddhist self is part of the burden or the illusion of the world, right? So in view of these three traditions, especially in the Confucian world with its suffocating relationality, probably a buzzword now in the progressive milieu, let's say, the Taoist or queer self-negation is the one that I might find more desirable in a sense. I didn't answer your question about transdualism, but this is the I think this is necessary to set up the background, right, through which we can take the kind of philosophical thinking of the self in really ancient time, right, into contemporary rethinking of what can be done or what can we do with the self. Just a word. You said it beautifully, and that this dualism is the each and the hurt, right? Transdualism is a critique of dualism, and it is from very concrete, embodied, and deeply politicized position, right? As a queer subject, not conforming to the Confucian rules at home, let's say, as a non-white person constantly interrogated at the border, as even more concretely, a gay Asian man interpolated daily into blunt rejection in the impressively racist gay mainstream in the West, where I spent almost 14 years of my adult life, so the majority of my adult life, and paradoxically also where I enjoy most sexual promiscuity, right, with my brothers of all colors of the whole world. So it's kind of coming from these like this rich tradition that I'm constantly engaging with, but at the same time very concrete embodied experience. What exactly it is, maybe I'm rambling too much here. We can talk about maybe in the process.
Thank you. I think we needed a couple of semesters at least of introduction in the basics of Taoism and early Confucianism and their dialectic developments. But at least it gave us a very good window, thank you very much, into this way of thinking that I think indeed could be a very powerful key to help getting out of the trap of the flip-flop superficial dialectics that we keep falling into. I wondered, just a really quick question, because I attempted actually, and I forgot here, but to say queering instead of queer, so not an adjective or predicate, but as a process in order to point to that without having to do a lot of explaining on the way. I wondered if for you that would be a viable way to go.
Queering instead of queer?
Yeah, to say queering, because it seems important to have a simple keywords that we can throw around and use with teenagers and stuff, but that point into the right direction somehow, and not just like slap some jewelry and earrings and makeup on and then you're queer.
I'm not sure. Queering strikes me. I avoid using this word. Actually, it strikes me as borderline colonizing to the past. The whole methodology of queer ancient ways and also transdualism it has a lot to do with language. So I think to find the easy, not easy, but like to find a shortcut word might not be the right approach. Let's just play with language. Let's just not make sense and occasionally not make sense. But the idea behind both projects, I hope, is not that I queer ancient texts, but through the maneuver of language and reading, these texts can manifest themselves as resources to rethink contemporary issues related to queerness. So it's not a gesture that we make something that is not queer, right? In the sense of,
it's not a transitive verb.
You can say queering, right? But that outside of heteromodernity, coloniality, many things, many thinking, many the myriad things are queer in their own right, something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It also shows me you don't maybe need a lid for everything, even to save energy. Eva Illouz, maybe we should stay with the topic of Widerstand, of techniques to avoid being put in cooking pots all the time. And so in your various researches in different fields from, as you were saying, the commodification of emotion, specifically dating apps, or how the valuation of emotionality or of relationships is grabbed and commodified by capitalism. Do you see ways how we can escape being used in this way, or being commodified in this way, or do you see it as a necessity and the economic description as basically the description, or one possible description of everything that happens in the world, which is a way, of course, you can read Marx and Marxist narratives and also dialectics, but would make me a little bit depressed. On the other hand, I don't want to fall back into this naive idea of nature or self as something like when nature was translated into Japanese, for example, they took the word that meant spontaneous coming about of something, for taking things for granted. And this idea of nature is also not something that would seem to be realistic. But how can we get away? And if we did, who would we be? Or how can we keep navigating in a subversive way? Or what is your way to go here?
I don't know that I have a plan. So, you know, the nature of this thing analyzing of capitalist subjectivity, it's in a way, its very nature is to make very difficult the answer to the question you ask, because, you know, authenticity, as it gets constituted as an ideal for the self from, let's say, if I have to start somewhere, I would say it's Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau speaks about nature, talks about the corruption that society and civilization have exercised on mankind, and how everything was just so much better in the state of nature, which is not only descriptive for Rousseau, but also moral. And so there is this very central view that actually becomes a key topic of Western modern thought, which is that society is bad and corrupts whatever is pure, some kind of pure nature in us. Against this, if you want, this background or this idea, when this idea of authenticity emerges, what is going to emerge as well are all kinds of practices and techniques in order to recuperate, so to speak, this authentic self. It ranges from, you know, it ranges from going to a very exotic touristic destination. The more exotic, the tougher the sleep, the more authentic it is. Yoga, meditation are supposed to put you back in touch with your body. Therapy is supposed to help you bring out of yourself whatever was repressed. Tantric sex has the same effect, and so on and so forth. What I'm trying to say is that, you know, if you even look at the hippie movement, which was in many ways a rejection of all that consumer society was supposed to be about, the hippie movement is caught in this very same paradox, which is that in order to make this claim, it uses the music industry. It uses the fashion industry, the jeans and the hippie style would become highly commodified signs that you belong to a liberated group. So the hippie movement itself is caught within this impossible gesture of both affirming its freedom and emancipation and authenticity from consumer culture and capitalism, and using it at the same time and being in it. So, the gay movement, in many ways, came about thanks to consumer boycotts. It came about through the possibility of meeting in clubs and discotheques that were outside the mainstream leisure venues, but which were consumer venues. So to go back to your question, can we invent, I'm not sure exactly what the right word would be, can we go beyond this? There are empirical examples of people who voluntarily now exile themselves in the countryside, in the French countryside, for example, to create communes of self-sustained people. And that for me is very much something that exists only in the margins. I don't think we're going to see droves of people going back to the countryside and cultivating their own vegetables and voluntarily giving up on everything that is consumer. So the very reason why it has been very difficult for me, it is very difficult, and I think we should actually stand in this difficulty as opposed to trying to resolve it, as opposed to trying to find a solution to it. I think the point is to stand in the difficulty, which is that consumer capitalism works so powerfully precisely through its capacity to constitute the inner space of the self, so that consumer capitalism is not experienced as something alienating and foreign. It is experienced as precisely that which enables me to have a voice, to be an I, to be a subject, and to oppose the so-called external forces which want me to be something I am not. And so I think that is the difficulty we should discuss, as opposed to try to transcend it.
Right, we stay here and we stay with the difficulties, and
maybe let me jumping to so this is this maybe 2 points. One is the going back to countryside and plant one's own vegetable and so on. What do you think about romantic anti-capitalism? Right, this is very much sounds like romantic anti-capitalism as like a gesture, and it's very problematic history the political right and even extremism, right? And it's a very racist project in some manifestation.
What do you mean by romantic anti-capitalism? You mean, there were in the 19th century, the end of the 19th century, there were movements that wanted to go back to nature. These movements were, emphasized the body, the kind. Is that what you have in mind?
Yeah. Well, it has different resurgence, right? This emphasis on nature.
Maybe a kind of anti-rationalist movement against the Enlightenment rhetoric. Also, in agrarian industry was booming in the 18th century, and then as a counter movement to that, this romantic movement of breastfeeding your children and wearing wearing no corsets, kind of thing.
This is for me or for you?
I think it's in the middle.
I have to subscribe to here. I'm on this point. I think I'm completely Marxist. Marx, who had zero patience and zero capacity zero patience for and capacity to romanticize the pastoral, non-pre-capitalist past. And Marx, in some text, I think it's a letter or a short text, even speaks about the idiocy of village life. And you really have to read the Communist Manifest to be amazed by the deep admiration that Marx has for capitalism and for the enormous creative powers. We're not talking powers, creative powers that capitalism unleashes. And Marx is entirely aware that capitalism is actually, in a way, an immense force for the good of humanity, and he has no desire whatsoever to go back to the past. Some of the movements you have referred to want to go back to the past and oppose a kind of Gemeinschaft, an ideal pure Gemeinschaft. Now, Gemeinschaft, this kind of Gemeinschaft, I have always been places that discriminated against strangers and women. And so I have, like Marx, absolutely no romanticization of these communities. And I don't think actually right now, although we can probably criticize the idea of progress, we can decelerate, we can limit growth, we can do all of these. I don't think for the moment, I don't have the imagination, I will put it more carefully. I don't have the imagination to see right now in the next future, next 10 years, how we overcome capitalism at all. But this is a diagnosis of the present. It doesn't say anything about, what will happen along the line. So just to go back to our topic and about a topic of critique, for me, the question is how to criticize an economic system that has in fact encompassed the totality of being and that has come to redefine intimacy. The most intimate relationship we may have to ourselves, not only to others, but to ourselves. So it's this intimate way that capitalism has to lodge itself into our interiority, which I find maddening and very difficult to overcome and criticize as well. I think that's what the book you were referring to was trying to say. It was trying to make clear those difficulties.
It is difficult. It will probably remain difficult, and but that's why I think endeavors to, on the one hand, as you do so beautifully, to analyze what is happening, reframe the narratives of what is happening, and to make ourselves more articulate in our self-observation, also our observation of ourselves and our environments, in how we manifest ourselves in media, in material that is a kind of reflection of global production chains, global transportation chains. But I do think it's also interesting not to jettison the romantic fantasies for what they're worth. If I hear of a shepherd going viral, then it certainly plays on such fantasies, and there's usually a reason why people have longings, even if they're longings for an image of something that has never existed in that form, that is a ghost born of absence.
I just will say, and this is to go back to your remark, these romantic fantasies accompany consumer capitalism from the start. You know, there's a beautiful, marvelous book by Jackson Lears that's called No Place of Grace, where he really shows how consumer culture gets really constituted by these dreams of an non-consumer space, by an anti-consumer space, and that it is these non-consumer or anti-consumer themes that actually help sell much better all kinds of commodities. And if you think of tourism, which is, you know, the fastest growing industry after World War II, tourism is such a commodity. You're supposed to consume nature. You're supposed to consume yourself. You're supposed to consume an authentic culture, the authentic other. You're supposed to meet the other. All of these themes are actually embedded in that industry, in the fastest and largest industry that is perhaps responsible single-handedly for the most massive transformation of the planet, which is the tourist industry. It contains this utopia. Consumerism contains from the outset an anti-consumerist utopia. At the very moment it sells you that anti-consumerist commodity. That's what I was trying to say before.
I fear you're right, and it's a thought that can make me really think about suicide instantly if I take it seriously.
No.
But still, at the same time, I think I'm with you, being a rational being, absolutely against delusions and full of ekel, of disgust at the appalling way that the capitalism is grabbing my very longings and building another tourism, another mega yacht out of it or something. I saw one in turtle shape recently, which is Honu, the turtles in Hawaii, whatever, other story. There's no worse cynicism than seeing that. At the same time, maybe we all have been children reading books that are sick with cliches, and at the same time have felt longing for being a pirate or any of these childish fantasies, or becoming a football star as a girl or something. And there's something that I think is not wrong in people's longings for something else than the totally capitalized reality we are in. So I guess we have to be both of these selves at the same time, possibly. And that maybe leads to the next question I have that would connect this again to criticism, and how we can do criticism without completely negating the liveliness that gives birth to affects that do have some kind of seeds of anarchy in them, I think, and seeds to not overcome, but to slip through and undermine systems of control and systems of valorization. And at the same time, well, it seems like an important question how to critique affect, at the same time, how to respecting affect, or I'm not sure if affect is the best chosen word. Maybe before we get to there, that's the question I want to arrive at, but to pass back to Zhang Zairan, what word would you choose rather than affect, maybe as some kind of impulse or vital energy or whatever, something that we might carry with us that has some kind of energy that is able to do mischief in the capitalist world? Or maybe frame it differently. Desire. Yay.
The difficulty, the difficulty Eva just talked about is the second part that I didn't arrive at to answer your question about transdualism. Well, transdualism, let me go back. So on one hand, it's very much grounded on the embodied experience, mostly torturous experience with dualism, right? With this thing that structures sexism, colonialism, and everything that oppresses us. But at the same time, it's an awareness that everything is entangled. Everything is entangled in philosophical means, but it's also entangled through capitalism, precisely. And it's my like seeing no hope in successionist strategies, right? I think this romantic anti-capitalism is the darker kind, let's say, of the successionist strategy, but also there is different exclusionary politics that pretend that we can still kind of find a little island, or for lack of a better word, a colony, right, of whatever affiliation that we might find each other outside of this system, call it capitalism, right? Or outside of the planetarily entangled, very complex situation we find ourselves in, which is the climate change. Part and parcel of capitalist modernity, coloniality, right? So I do not want to become a safe fortress, to use a metaphor, there, and
to become what? I'm sorry. What did you say? To become a
safe fortress?
Safe fortress, right?
Okay. Yes.
And precisely the Taoists ask us to begin with self-negation, right? So dualism, transdualism does not want to pretend we can critique dualism in the sense that we find very often in formulated in the way in the following. This thought, this methodology seeks to move beyond dualism, right? Go beyond, and each movement of critique of dualism precisely reproduce a dualistic gesture, right? So transdualism want to stick with the trouble, stay with the trouble, and see if we can find through classical traditions, not only in Chinese but in the very rich reservoir of cultures that are outside modernity, coloniality, ways that think about dualistic operations without pretending we can overcome it, right? All these words, overcoming, going beyond, they all have this dualistic operation that reproduce the very thing that is under attack, right? One figure in Taoism that I find useful, and this is intimately linked with desire, is the word tong, translated into English more or less as pervasion, or penetrability. On the one hand, on the other hand, also in my own kind of thinking or influenced by Taoist dialectics so on one hand you have pervasion, tong, which is like communication, penetrability, and so on, which look very much like how capitalism works. And on the other hand, you have indifference or stubbornness or rigidity, right? I think desire works in both ways. It's very rigid, right? We all know we don't love everyone, right? Well, we might love everyone, but we don't necessarily find everyone sexually attractive, let's say. This is the rigidity or stubbornness. But desire is the desire to be pervasive, right? To connect and so on. So this is the figure to go back to Anne's question. Yeah.
Thank you.
That is. And sorry, just to add, if we think about psychoanalysis, desire is this very almost blind force, right? that traverses so many things, traverses stratification, reification, so on and so forth.
So if I can respond to you, it's very inspiring. And I'm going to be so much less inspiring than you. First of all, I confess that I am very suspicious of desire as a force from which can come our redemption, because if there is one thing that has been thoroughly, totally colonized, it is precisely desire. Even by psychoanalysis itself, as a technique to make it be. And not only psychoanalysis, but consumer culture. I mean, take desire out of the economy collapses. This economy relies entirely on, it's an economy of desire.
But then we could use the negative desire of the desire that consists in refusal, or the desire not to.
I don't know if that, I don't know. Really, I don't know. It's not a question I have thought about enough. I simply don't know if the desire if that negative desire has enough force. Although, let me say, the second thing I was going to say might be what you call desire, negative desire. I believe in gestures of resistance that emerge, that explode. For example, just today, 1,200 people walked out of Twitter. And that is not a planned, I don't think it's a real planned gesture. It has no ideology behind it. It's just an act of resistance. It is an act in which people feel, this is to go back to what we were saying at the very beginning, I think they feel violated. Their self feels entirely violated, and then they say no more. That's the gesture of Rosa Parks, who refuses to stand up and to move in a bus and to leave her seat to a white man.
I'm not quite sure if it's a...
So I don't know if this is what you call negative desire, but for me, it's an eruption of resistance that, if Twitter comes down, and it could come down, I don't know exactly. I mean, I don't understand enough in the economy of Twitter, but it looks like it is in a mess right now. If Twitter comes down, you could say that this act of spontaneous resistance of people who simply walked out, who refused to participate, who simply said no, might actually serve as a paradigm for further resistance.
I think Rosa Parks can serve as a paradigm if we want to utilize her, which I'm not sure we can, but we can admire her act, and really, I think we need to acknowledge that the actual violence that she was susceptible to. I think you cannot compare that to leaving Twitter. I love the expression, people walked out of Twitter, because it's actually not a space. And I think one reason behind it could be that people realized they were supposed to pay to legitimize their identity on Twitter. And as soon as you realize you have to pay, that's like the i-Tüpfel, the dot of the hair that broke the camel's back, I guess the expression, that we've had maybe mixed feelings about Twitter for a long time, but if we have to pay to identify myself, that's just too much. But I don't think nobody is endangered if they're not on Twitter. Nobody is being insulted if they're not on Twitter. In fact, you might be insulted more likely if you are on Twitter. So I'm not sure the analogy works, but it certainly shows the transience of the media and how swiftly they've also been changing in the past few years, so that we feel the transience of ourselves as well. And that's certainly a deep disconcertment that I think the capitalism is very skilled in creating addictions, so that if you eat fast food, you don't feel satiated deeply. You feel you're still waiting for some real satiation. So fast food eaters keep on eating more food. Similarly, scrollers. And these mechanisms are what the marketing has been focusing on for the past probably 70, 80 years, since marketing discovered emotions, and a lot of research was done, also funded by US military and the MIT and so on. Great studies, impressive things. But that's where I see the necessity of finding a reframing of narratives of emotion, so that we can even understand our own multifarious selves in other terms than of those of the studies that are being used to trigger us, which works so well. Which is why I think we need to keep hold of the difference between a virtual world and a real or away from keyboard world, precisely so that we can use them for guerrilla tactics. And that's why I'm sorry, I reacted too strongly to the Twitter and Rosa Parks analogy, but
I think you misunderstood me, but I really thank you for bringing this clarification and for making me clarify. I certainly did not want to say the two were the same. What I was speaking about were moments in which nothing is planned, and where by the way, I think the people at Twitter did not react so much to the paywall. They were reacting to the demand by Elon Musk that they now become hardcore. He put it like that, hardcore workers. Hardcore workers, is a nice way to say you have no life anymore except for the company. That is what he meant by that. That is a very violent, I find it an extremely violent way to demand the soul and the body of these workers. So, of course, these workers have home to go are not discriminated against and can retain the complete bodily and moral integrity of themselves, as opposed to Rosa Parks. That goes without saying. I was talking about those. What I wanted to say is that I think there are two forms of resistance, since I was trying to answer your question. I think one of them is this one, the eruptive one, the one you don't plan, the one in which you say enough is enough. I will no longer be accomplice to something. I don't believe it anymore, and that violates myself. There are such moments. And the other one, and this goes back to this theme of critique, I think we cannot dismantle this enormous house that's called capitalism. What we can do, I think, is prioritize, choose where it hurts most, and actually do an enormous work of changing frames of intelligibility. That's why I don't know if I would work on affect personally. I think affect follows intelligibility. If you make the system no longer, or not the system, parts of it, no longer intelligible, if you make it self-justification, self-legitimation, no longer intelligible, because you dismantle it, because you analyze it. That's what the work of critique can do. What it cannot do, critique cannot plan the first moment of resistance, where all those alternative ways of explaining the social world will sink in and will make the voice of the master no longer acceptable. That's what I was trying to say, that at some point the voice of the master becomes unacceptable, unintelligible. And for me, critique is doing this work of changing and shifting modes of intelligibility.
I see. So it might indeed help to reframe capitalism as an entanglement and see both versions at the same time. It's the man, the master, and it's also consists of us and what we are doing all the time. And perhaps this kind of a diffused self, consisting of knowledge also, and remote knowledge of things we've never seen with our own eyes before, can help our actions be also situated in such a virtual way. But and I think that would be the trans in the sense of impermeability, and not misunderstood as trans like going beyond something on a timeline, or like going over, overcoming something once and for all in this perfective mode. But actually, Professor Xiang, could you maybe go back to the trans critique and the entanglement narrative of capitalism to maybe say once more how exactly that could work in a way where critique also helps to coordinate perhaps knowledge and feeling or personal experience.
Let me try to put something in as part of the transdualism project. I'm writing. The reason why I'm all over the place is because I'm writing it as a book, and there are so many different aspects to it. But we somehow come to a moment. I think it's interesting to discuss this. I'm very inspired by what Eva just said. Changing the frame of intelligibility. This of course I agree 100% what you said. Critique creates this situation in which the first moment of resistance could happen, right? But not planned. I'd like to think about a moment prior to that or outside of that as well. This is what would be a kind of like I don't know I can't remember how to call it, but a moment outside of the outside this almost over-determined concept of transdualism that think in planetary terms and cosmology and so on and so forth, is what I call radical indifference. So radical indifference works in this way. It cannot be described, it cannot be planned, but it exists in moments that later on, when we do critique, it could look like a form of resistance. It's always good to illustrate this with some examples. I have some examples. Let's say how this might work. So in China, on the public squares, you often see these middle-aged women, recently retired or not. They would gather together and dance as a form of exercise and socializing. Yeah. Oftentimes, you would see they would carry a bag, let's say, that is a knockoff of Louis Vuitton. Not exactly, you know, the exact copy, but it can be recognized as Louis Vuitton or Burberry or whatever. You go to ask them. A bad anthropologist will say, "Wow, look, capitalism is everywhere, right? There's it creates the desire for the brand, even for the middle-aged ladies on the square." But through a close interview with them, you start to realize that they didn't buy the bag because it is a knockoff of Louis Vuitton. It was simply because it's the thing that is available. It is bigger than the next bag. It looks more useful in that situation, right? So that moment constitute a form of very, very weak resistance to this big system of brand and commodified kind of you know, as it is related to class and taste and all these issues that we can talk about. The other example, this one is not very good. The other example is from a film. This woman. It's called And Spring Comes, the film. This woman is opera aficionada, and she really wants to go to Beijing to become an opera singer. And she's a music teacher at home. So she went to Beijing one day and bought a ticket from the black market, and then went to see an opera. She came back to her village, and her neighbor, a younger woman, was brushing teeth, her teeth outside of the dormitory. Right, it's a very humble setting, and the woman said, "Oh, Professor, you where did you go?" And she was very proud. This soprano wannabe, very proud, and said, "I went to Beijing because the Central Opera Company is trying to hire me as their soprano. They invited me to watch Tosca." And the younger woman stopped brushing teeth and asked her, "Tosha?" So Tosha in Chinese means stripe what, right? She heard the word tuo, right? Take off the clothes. So this entire carefully conceived lie of this soprano wannabe, together with this sublime idea of love and so on, as it is embodied in Tosca, collapse at this moment, right? But the younger teacher didn't intend at all to do what her action could have arrived at, right? So this is the kind of changing the frame of intelligibility, maybe from a position of almost of ignorance, right? But it cannot be planned, and it cannot come from the hierarchical, more powerful position. It always comes from the lowly position, and this is the idea of radical indifference, right? But what I want to also relate this to is maybe when we think about critique, when we think about subject, when we think about resistance, there stands actually a subject that really needs to be rethought with the help of Taoism, with the help of apophatic theology, all these different sources, is the super subject of the male colonizer, as it is modeled after the theopolitical or politicized theological concept of God as the one who created as if out of nothingness, right? The creatio ex nihilo idea, right? This phallic subject that does things as if from nowhere, right? As if the huge the rich feminist critique of social reproduction and all this could be brought into, right? So this subject that stands at the center of resistance and so on needs also be rethought, or let's say decolonized.
So it could be maybe also the kind of power of naivety, and maybe framing ourselves as a naive subject at the same time as a knowledgeable, controlling kind of subject, gathering as much information as we can get and understanding what's breaking us. Do you think it's possible to carry both these identities at the same time, or is it something else that you were getting at?
I think it's this precisely is the project of Taoism, right? It's how to cultivate. It's how to cultivate that. It's how to actively withdraw. And the paradox stays there, right? How can I withdraw, be active?
Yeah.
How can right? So on and so forth. But I just want to add a note. These quote unquote Chinese thought is extremely popular with management courses. Yeah? It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that the managerial capitalist class find very useful in these thinking.
So the question for you is whether, it's a question I've asked myself as well, because many good ideas have been very much used by theories of management since the 1930s. Does it invalidate those ideas? For example, just take the current obsession and fashion with positive thinking, with this idea that you really need to reinterpret what happens to you and take your fate into your hand and develop those, very positive, very positive thoughts in which you do not feel crushed by anything, and you feel maximum power. What do you do with these ideas once you know, indeed, that these are the ideas that actually are very congenial to a neoliberal conception of subjectivity, in which the subject has to be responsible for performance, for well-being, and which, in other words, also frees the organization, the corporation, the state from being responsible for those things. And so, in a way, you go, well, yes, isn't it what Stoicism is about? And many forms of spirituality, this is what they're about. They are about teaching us how to look at our interior selves and find in it the resources to cope with a cruel, mean, stupid world, on the one hand. But then these are the very tools that are used by management of late.
I think that
I'm asking you what the question I ask myself: what do we do with that?
It doesn't. I don't think it invalidates the. I don't think it matters if who use it, right? Like so the idea wouldn't be invalidated if a management course or the managerial class adopts it, appropriates it, right? The problem comes when these ideas are used to precisely sweep off or hide or wash away the cruelty behind the system.
Yeah.
So right. So of course, Taoism alone cannot be the solution, right? To
Taoism
to this.
isn't alone.
We do need Marxism.
We're here. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time. I thank you both very, very much for being here in this way. You're very much here, even though you're not, and we miss you. And I think that I really am not scared of the management seminars because they sound so stupid. And if we harness our natural or not natural or unnatural sense of language and of depth and of the complexity of concepts, if we just trust this feeling and don't even start believing the shallow bullshit that is served to us, and I think we can do that with the power of desire, we're safe and we can keep each other safe and keep listening. So thank you both very, very much for also your patience with the media and with the situation, and please take care, stay well, and
thank you.
Hope to see you again.
Thank you. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you.